All right. Well, welcome again, everyone, and thank you for being here. This patient education series is brought to you by Icona Health. Icona is a learning science company unlocking health literacy for patients and kidney care teams. Our evidence-based, delivery-focused learning tools are designed to tackle the toughest challenges in understanding and navigating your care journey. Our learning objectives for today are going to be defining the stages of chronic kidney disease, nutritional basics and knowing yourself, common struggle points, and strategies to overcome. My name is Caroline. I'm Icona's lead clinical educator, and I'm really excited to be with you here again today. I've been a nephrology nurse for the past 10 years or so. And I want to start out with talking a little bit about the chronic kidney disease stages, just to give you a little overview before we talk with Rich. There are 5 stages to kidney disease, as you can see on this slide in front of you. They are all based on the GFR, or the kidney's estimated filtration rate. And that's a lab that providers use to help determine the stage of kidney disease. Starting on the left-hand side, when the GFR is between 60 and 90, that's considered mild kidney disease, or stages 1 and 2. Moderate kidney disease is those middle stages, which is stage 3, but has now been broken up into 2 sections, stage 3A and 3B. And that is between 59 and 30 for that filtration rate. Stage 4 is where we work into severe kidney disease, and that's less than 30 on the GFR. And then when we get all the way to that right-hand side, which is stage 5, that's progressing towards kidney failure. And usually in stage 5 is when we're talking about kidney replacement therapy being initiated. And the reason I bring these stages up in a nutrition webinar is that the stages of kidney disease play a really important role in your nutrition needs. The practice guidelines suggest that you should always discuss diet with your physician to understand your personal health goals based on your lab results. Your doctor will discuss your results at appointments, which can change based on your specific needs for things like potassium, protein, sodium, and many other nutrients. So making those lifestyle and dietary changes can be difficult, but improving diet for people with conditions like diabetes can delay the progression of chronic kidney disease. So that's why it's so important and why we take so much time to talk about it. But what we're all here for and what I'm really excited about is we're now going to hear from Rich Wood, who earned his PhD in nutritional sciences and has spent his career designing programs for people with metabolic disease. Rich has a strong history in clinical research and specifically conducting studies to find the best strategies to support people living with chronic kidney disease. So welcome, Rich.
All right, good afternoon. There we are. It's really nice to be here. Caroline, thank you so much. And thanks for the intro. I can see why you are listed as expert host. That is certainly the case. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, my name is Rich Wood, and I wanted to add a little bit to the, to the intro here. I've really dedicated my career to helping people who are living with metabolic disease, and spent most of my time in grad school doing research in the areas of metabolic disease and lipid metabolism, and have been part of a lot of clinical research trials, including patients with diabetes, hypertension, and chronic kidney disease. And it's always been a passion of mine to help others. And I've taken quite a liking to nutrition, spent a lot of time in that area. So thrilled to be here today. And let's see, I add a little bit here. So I am in the great state of Rhode Island, by the way. As the 10 of us who live here are, I'm a big Rhode Island fan. I've been happily married now 20 years. I have 2 boys, so I have 2 teenage boys. I spend a lot of money on groceries because they do nothing but eat. And they also both play hockey. So I'm really, really busy. running around to hockey rinks and so on. So, I share all that with you to give you a little bit of personal background on me. And I'm looking forward to kind of answering some questions today and also teeing up some what I think are some of the most important principles in terms of health, nutrition, and how we can practice good nutrition in a very confusing world. So thanks again, Caroline. Thrilled to be here and ready to rock and roll.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you, and your background is so impressive. And I think this is a great conversation to have going into the holidays. I think everybody, no matter what your health situation is, can probably use this talk before that time. So can you start by giving us your take on how you start with personalizing nutrition?
Absolutely. It's such a big question. You hear so much about it today, personalize and personalization, and what does it mean? And before I dive into that, I kind of want to validate what I imagine a lot of people feel. Nutrition is very confusing. You feel like you hear different stories on the news. One way, don't eat fat; the other, fat's fine. Sodium's bad, sodium's good. Healthy foods, etc. And I think what it comes down to, it's very, very confusing for a lot of people. And so, what I want to try to do today is help to minimize some of that confusion, to give some guiding principles to help maybe navigate the confusing times. And I agree absolutely. During the holidays, it's kind of exponentially more difficult. So when I talk about personalized nutrition, I'm a big believer there's no such thing as the right diet. Okay. There's what we consider to be a match between the person and their nutritional needs at the given time. So there's really those three variables: the nutrition pattern, the person, and the time and the stage of their life and their health that they're at. And when you decide how to personalize nutrition, you actually have to take all of those factors into account. And then when it comes to actually personalizing, people say, well, how do you do that? And really, I've used these three kind of simple type of mantras, if you will, that should help with that. And that's really to first know yourself. And then secondly, to think in patterns. And then third, to be prepared for nutrition. So whenever people ask me about this, I really use those three kind of guiding principles. And I want to dive into each of those for a minute or two here. I know Caroline will kind of dive into them in quite some depth, but just to give an overall idea, okay? To know yourself really is about understanding your own needs. And that's part of what Caroline mentioned at the beginning, okay? So knowing your personal health goals, working with your physician, et cetera. Knowing yourself is probably the very most important starting point for nutrition. Secondly, when I say think in patterns, we have multiple what you'd consider food exposures on a given day. So you may eat and drink 4, 5, or 6 times a day. Each of those is an exposure. And you really need to look at the collective pattern across all of that to understand how health is impacted. And then finally, being prepared for nutrition. That's kind of like where the rubber meets the road. How do we do this? How do we make this work in our busy lives? So that's where I would start with those three kind of guiding principles.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to pull up our first poll question so we can engage everybody. It looks like, how confident are you with making good nutritional choices was our question. The first one we had extremely, and that was only about 17% of you. Moderately was definitely our biggest category at 67%. And then slightly, we had about 17% of our viewers mention that. So it sounds like we all have some room for improvement on the confidence.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a fun question, and it gives you a chance to sit back and reflect a little bit. And that's a big part of know yourself, by the way. Great.
Perfect. Well, I think so. Our first deeper dive is going to be into know yourself. I'm excited to hear more about that.
Sure. Happy to. So know yourself. And this is probably an exercise in reflection. And it's not something you would do once and be done with. It's something periodically you want to go back to. And so the first thing is really understanding where you struggle. And throughout, I will try to share personal examples from myself. I'm happy to do that. And I'd encourage everybody in the audience to be thinking the same. So knowing where you struggle with nutrition is probably one of the most important things you can do, because once you know where you struggle, then you can kind of hone in on where you're going to focus and try to make some improvements. And I'll give you one of my examples. It comes down to sweets. Gosh, I loved, boy, my mom, she cook? She can bake. And I'll tell you what, if she makes brownies, if I eat a brownie, I really struggle to not eat 5 brownies. Now, on the other hand, my wife can take a bite of a brownie and say, "Oh, I'm so glad I got to try it. It was really good," and be done. I cannot do that. I've never been able to do that. So I've learned, knowing myself, if I get in that situation, that I'm going to struggle to not eat all the brownies and arm wrestle everybody in the room to get theirs. So for me, knowing that is really kind of the first step. And then it's coming up with, how are we going to address that? And we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of thing in a few minutes. So knowing yourself is knowing where you struggle. So I would encourage everybody to start by saying, what are your hardest situations? Let me share some other examples. Some people will say to me, I travel on business and it's so hard to eat healthy in airports, when I'm on the run, when I'm driving and I have only a rest area to stop at. Other people don't struggle with that at all, because either they don't travel, or when they travel, it's not hard for them. Some people will say, I am a caretaker and I'm taking care of folks, and it may be children, it could be elderly parents. And that is very, very difficult, because maybe you need to eat certain types of foods, but the folks that you're taking care of don't eat the same foods, and then you struggle to not eat what they're eating. I hear a lot of people with young kids will say this. The kids are eating chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, and then it's just easier for everybody to eat it. Okay, so those are a few. Another is, I have no idea how to shop for groceries. No, I don't really know what I'm doing. Either I don't do it myself, or whatever. Another common struggle, I don't really know how to eat when I go to restaurants. Is it possible to eat healthy in a restaurant? Maybe it just isn't, right? So these are the kind of things where, if you can identify why it is that you struggle and where you struggle, then you can really start to drill down on that. So a second piece of this, in terms of knowing where you struggle, I would also encourage you to think about, where do you do really well? And it sounds like we had 17% of folks are super confident. And so you might have a lot of things you do really well. You might be great at shopping. You might be great at cooking. You may not struggle at all with food peer pressure. You're going to a work event. There's donuts on the conference room table. There's another birthday party this afternoon at work. Some people don't struggle with that. And so understanding where you do really, really well is also super helpful, I think. And then I would also add to this, what are things you have tried in the past and how have they gone? So I know for me, I've tried just about everything you can name in nutrition, just because it's my vocation, and it's kind of fun to do that. And I know there are certain dietary patterns that I've tried where I'm always hungry, I feel tired, and it just didn't really work well for me. So again, it's thinking about where you struggle and knowing what those situations are. Where do you do really, really well? And what have you tried and what has worked? So that would be kind of my first step, Caroline, to say, everybody should try to reflect on those 3 and come up with at least a couple, 3, 4 different bullet points for each.
Perfect. Yes. And I love that you brought up pointing out the good things too. I think a lot of us beat ourselves up when it comes to nutrition and stay in sort of a negative space, at least speaking personally. So I think, pointing out those good things is so important too. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely.
All right. So we're going to look at our second poll, and that one talks more about how familiar we are with reading nutritional facts labels. So 14% were extremely familiar, which is awesome. We have 71% who are moderately familiar, and then 14% who are not familiar at all.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think they kind of trending in a similar direction between the 2 poll questions. Very good. Okay. And I think especially in kidney disease. And one of the things that, that Caroline talked about earlier, that I just want to emphasize now, our goal today isn't to give very specific personal advice as much it is to share guiding principles. And then you're working with your care team to understand what are your mineral requirements, what are your protein requirements, et cetera. But to be able to put that into practice, understanding what a food label means, how to navigate it is really, really important. And there are a lot of very confusing terms when it comes to nutrition labels. So I think if you fall into the middle or bottom category there, I'd like to share just a couple of things to maybe be helpful before we move on, if that works for you.
Absolutely.
Terrific. So a couple things that are common mistakes when it comes to reading a food label. One of the first mistakes is people sometimes don't understand that the nutrition information within that nice little organized box there, that is per serving. And sometimes people don't realize that that's not, there are multiple servings in a container. So that can get confusing. And so a common example people will use is a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. The pint has usually 4 servings. So that container that some people might think that is the serving that would actually be 4. So a common mistake is people will look at the label and think, okay, this is what is in the container, and it's not. So that's an important one to look at. Other things you'll see on a nutrition label, things like calories. So the calories are the energy in food. And we are able, it's one of the incredible things about the human body. When we eat, we take that food and we convert it into usable energy. And we need that energy to do everything from breathing to sitting up straight in the chair, to even having physical activity, taking walks and that sort of thing. So we need energy, and food is where we get that. And it's interesting, some people will just look at food as a vehicle to deliver energy to your body. Not a fun way, it has so many cultural connections to our lives. But so the calories are also on there, and calories are part of what a connection to body weight. And people talk a lot about body weight and body weight regulation. So there is a connection there between the calories in the food and how that contributes to your body weight, staying the same, going up or going down. And then you'll also see a little bit of information about minerals. And one of the challenges in kidney disease is minerals are a very, very important part of your nutrition. And I heard you talk about those at the beginning, Caroline. So things like phosphorus and potassium and sodium. So you'll see the sodium content in the food label, but you're not going to see all of the other minerals. And so that's one of the challenges you have, is learning about that. And there are a lot of great nutrition databases out there that can get that information for you pretty easily. So those are a couple of little guiding principles about food labels and what can be confusing. And certainly, by the way, I'd encourage everybody to use the comments in the chats to ask any questions, and I'll do my best to answer those. I think we already have a bunch, but please keep them coming.
Yes, thank you. I know the nutrition label can be daunting at the grocery store for sure, and it can be overwhelming. So thank you for those tips. Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned earlier about thinking in patterns. Can you tell us a little bit more about that topic?
Absolutely. And I want to kind of start off by thinking about this old vision of nutrition, and then try to bring everybody to a little bit of a different view of nutrition. The old view of nutrition is that there's this one healthy diet. And I don't actually like the term diet that much. I do think more in patterns, and that's what this talks about. It's the pattern that matches up with your needs at this time. So I like to think in patterns, and that pattern can slightly change over time. So as mentioned earlier, your protein requirements and the amount of protein you should eat may change as your health changes, as your lab results change. And that's why it's so important to stay in touch with your provider and understand your recommendations for your needs. And then looking at your overall intake in patterns. So if one of the things, a very common condition that folks with chronic kidney disease have is also type 2 diabetes. And so it's very, very common to have both of them. And diabetes is a condition where it's difficult to control the amount of sugar in your blood. So one of the ways you can control it is through nutrition. And a lot of what we introduce through food can make your glucose go up, your blood glucose go higher, your sugars, as they call it. And that affects it, what they call your A1C, your chronic or over time, your glucose control. So being able to think about which patterns will allow me to keep my glucose stable is very, very important. Which types of foods are helping my glucose stay even. And that's why measuring and doing your labs is so important, because that helps you to understand the pattern that is right for you. And I use that term differently. And so I'll give some more specific examples now. For example, a vegetarian vegan approach is a very common approach. And for some people, that's the right pattern. So a vegan approach is where you eat no animal products at all. And so it's a very common pattern. There's a lot of tremendous resources out there for people who want to try that. And that pattern works really, really well for some people. And for other people, it doesn't, for a variety of different reasons. So other people look at what's more of a Mediterranean, or you could do a vegetarian pattern where maybe people will include things like some dairy products. They will include things like cheese, but still would not eat things like meats like beef or chicken, etc. And so that's a different type of pattern that's maybe right for some people and not for others. Same thing, Mediterranean, sort of a similar idea. Emphasizing a lot of fruits and vegetables, emphasizing minimal amounts of red meat, etc. So what I would encourage you to do is talk to your provider, understand your personal needs, and think about which of these patterns are things that you can sustain over a long period of time. So Caroline, that's what I mean about thinking patterns, is which pattern is the right starting point, whether it's a vegan, vegetarian, it might be more of a Mediterranean approach, or there's something called the DASH approach that I think a lot of folks are familiar with. And yet further on, there's also low carbohydrate approaches, et cetera. So working with your provider to know which of those is the best starting point for you is a really nice step. And then I want to talk about a different thing with patterns too. So another way to look at that term is your own daily intake. And nutrition is hard. Okay, so I have a PhD in lipid metabolism, nutrition. I've spent my career in this field. It's still hard for me. It's really hard, especially having kids, being on the go all the time. It's hard to do. So the advice that I have, if you're in that similar situation to me, where it's just craziness all the time, think in patterns. Sometimes somebody will have a slice of pizza and say, that's it, I blew it, I totally blew it. And then figure, well, why even try anymore? I stepped off, I ruined it, I'm done. However, let's say you were looking to follow more of a vegan approach, which wouldn't have included that cheese on the pizza, among other things. You might say, gosh, the last 10 food exposures I have were just right. I really met my goal. I just had this one that was off pattern. I could make the next food exposure on pattern, I'm right back. So when you think of the pattern of the last 10 food exposures, instead of focusing in on this one and beating yourself up over this one, it's a lot easier to continue to stay on track.
Absolutely. I think we can all relate to having just, a bad meal, a bad snack, any of those things and feeling really down. So I think that's a relatable topic for sure. Our next poll is about those busy days and having to eat out. We asked, how often do you eat out each week? We've got 43% saying 0 to 2, so not very many times. And then 57% saying 3 to 6 times a week. Mm-hmm. So those are just meals that are not prepared at home.
Gotcha. Okay. So that tends to be a bigger challenge. So if you eat 0 meals out, maybe then figuring out what to eat in a restaurant is not as difficult. If you tend to eat at least a few different meals out, that changes things a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit now about this concept of be prepared. So as a quick review here, we talked about know yourself. We talked about thinking patterns, and now I want to talk about being prepared. And it reminds me there's a famous boxer named Mike Tyson, and one of his famous quotes is, "Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face." And it always kind of makes me laugh because there's actually a lot of applicability to nutrition. So imagine you're sitting with your registered dietitian. And by the way, if you're fortunate enough to know or work with a registered dietitian, that is probably the best place to go for nutrition advice, especially those with the kidney certification that are experts in kidney conditions. So I'd highly recommend if you're able to do that. A tremendous, very, very prepared and excellent professionals to work with. So imagine you're sitting there with your dietitian, your doctor, and it's like, I'm going to do better eating. And you go out and the next meal you eat is picture perfect. It's not too much food. You've got the right amount of minerals in there to be right on track. And then all of a sudden you get a call and you get called into work. You've got to work overtime unexpectedly, and they need you right now. Or you get a call, great news, the baby's being born. Let's pack the car and go. Whatever it may be, all of a sudden your plans have changed. Okay, so everybody has a plan, and then you get punched in the face for whatever reason. And so when it comes to be prepared for nutrition, I like to think about, how do you prepare yourself for when the punches come, so to speak. Okay, so when you know yourself, that's how you then plan. So I want to go back to know yourself, and then we're going to talk about be prepared. Let's say you work in an office building, and the only thing in that office building are the donuts sitting on the conference room table and a vending machine. So you know you will struggle when you are in that building if you need something to eat, especially if you have a last minute meeting and you forget your lunch, get punched in the face, right? So be prepared for nutrition means you pack foods that you can keep in your drawer, or you pack something, kind of a little safety kit, or a little the fire extinguisher there, in case of fire, break the glass. So that having that available is part of being prepared. So I said I would share examples. So if you went out into my truck right now, you would find a bag of almonds in there, and that's my little fire extinguisher in the case. If I go out and I end up going to a second hockey game that the kids are playing in that I didn't know they were playing in, I know those are there for me. I also carry protein bars. For me, that's part of how my pattern and my health match up. So I know I should carry those. For you, it might be something different. There are a lot of great options. So number one is thinking about the situations you get in where you struggle, and then heading them off at the pass, knowing right away, how can I be prepared to deal with that? A second example that's maybe a little more relatable is preparing food during weeknights. You get home from work, you're exhausted from the day. Maybe you are taking care of kids, taking care of elderly, neighbors, etc., and you just don't have the energy to cook. If that's a vulnerable situation for you, having meals that you prepared and froze is a great way to be prepared. So cooking in bulk, freezing some, or packaging some to keep on the side is a great way to be prepared for those moments where you're like, I'm not cooking, I can't do this tonight. So being prepared means when those tough situations show up, how can you counter them? And then there's a couple of other ones I wanted to share. So I use this concept of go-to meals. So go-to meals. What do I mean by that? That means if you're going to a restaurant with a party, if you're going to a dinner party at somebody's house, you've already mapped out the right meal for you to eat, and you've figured that out ahead of time. Believe it or not, the stress of trying to figure that out and the pressure of being in a group of people can make that very difficult to execute on. So when you know ahead of time what you're going to do, you don't have to think, and you don't have that stress. So I'm happy to share. I have 3 go-to meals for myself, especially when I travel, because I do travel a bit. But one of them that's so easy is a chicken Caesar salad, no croutons. For me, I know that's going to make me feel full. It's going to be satisfying. And almost anywhere I go, they have something, some derivative of that. So without thinking, without needing to look at a menu. So I would encourage you to think about what are your go-to meals? And that's another one that folks in the audience can do. Write down a couple of things. Work with your registered dietitian, work with your doc, with your nurse to figure out, is this the right go-to meal for me? And then have a few of them available. And then do I have time to do one more?
Absolutely. Yes, please.
Okay, all right, perfect. So the last one I'll say is not really a food related one. It's a behavior related one. And we talked about a few minutes ago about going into the holidays. Being prepared for distractions. So what do I mean by distractions? You know that if you go over to your cousin's house and your cousin makes a famous pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving, and you know maybe that's not consistent with a pattern you're trying to follow, or you know you're going to go to a winter holiday party every Friday night in December, and somebody's going to offer you a cocktail that you don't want. You know you're going to be in these situations. So I would encourage you to think about, how are you going to handle those? So if somebody tries to get you to eat something that you're not eating right now, what is it that you're going to say? So a couple of things, and this is a very personal decision, but I'm going to share it like across the spectrum things people say. One of the things people will say is, I'm really focusing on my health right now, so thank you for the offer, but that's not going to work for me. Having and practice saying that, okay, because it's harder in front of a group of people. So practice saying that's not consistent with my health goals. Other people would really not like to talk about their health in public and wouldn't say something like that. So maybe you don't want to talk about your health, and maybe you just want to say, oh, I'm definitely going to try something later, I'm just not ready yet. That's an easy way to kind of take the pressure off yourself in the moment and not put it off the table, especially if you're dealing with a very pushy host. You didn't say, no, get that out of here. You said, I'll have something later, I'm just not ready yet. That's a tough one to argue with. I'm not ready yet is really you kind of advocating for yourself. So, and we can give lots of other examples. I would just encourage you to think about, this is again, being prepared, the challenges behaviorally that you will have, and then how you're going to handle them before they happen.
Excellent. Thank you. I know the pushy host one sticks out to me. I'm in North Carolina. So here in the South, we make big meals full of fried things, and most hosts want you to partake in everything. So those are some good strategies, some good takeaways, because I know that's coming.
Absolutely. Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that. That it's it can be really discouraging to have to do that. And again, I talked about thinking in patterns, and if you have a party and it's a little more indulgent in one than another, some people can be indulgent at times. Some people's health is not there, and they really should not be, depending on what your providers talk to you about. But what gets hard, to continue on this pattern, when you think about it, the holiday season is not necessarily about like one day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's not about 1 or 2 days. It's about months of time. And so you kind of have to have these strategies that will work for longer periods of time. And it's very possible. I just encourage you, maybe this year is the different year. It's the year that you're a little more prepared and you feel a little bit more confident going forward.
Absolutely. I think these are great strategies, and this is perfect timing for them. Well, I want to make sure we get to answer some of these great questions. So let me go ahead and see what everybody's asking about.
Right.
Our first one is a plant-based diet good for people with kidney disease?
Great. So I will start as I start with any other personalized nutrition recommendations. You want to make sure that your provider or your registered dietitian and you are on the same page about what you need. So I can't say it's the perfect approach for every person with kidney disease. That being said, there are a lot of people with kidney disease who can do very, very well, and it is the right pattern. So what I would encourage you to do is to work with your provider and understand that. And also understand about yourself, is that something that will work for you, that you're willing to try and commit to? And some people are simply going to say, there's no way, there's no way. But others will say, yeah, absolutely. And if you're one of those people, I'd absolutely encourage you to talk to your provider and then go out and get the resources to help you follow that in a consistent and sustainable way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, our next one is a good obstacle I know a lot of people have, and it's how would you advise a CKD patient to improve their nutritional patterns while being budget friendly? I know inflation, everything that is a hot topic right now.
It is a great question, by the way. Thank you. And thank you to the audience. I love that so many questions have come in. Please keep them coming. So budget friendly is really important, and you could argue it's more important now than it was even a few years ago. A couple of strategies there. First of all, can you shop in bulk? And that gets a little harder depending on your situation. So, with a family of four, it kind of makes sense. If you live by yourself, it might not. So then I would encourage you to think about friends, neighbors, whoever. Could you share a bulk type of membership, et cetera? Because there can be some good discounts there. Secondly, is think about the things that you're eating that come pre-prepared. And I mentioned to talk about, this, I meant to talk about it with the food labels. Probably most of the things most of us should eat on a regular basis don't even have a food label. Something to think about. But when it comes to those types of foods that are pre-packaged, if you make those yourself and can take the time to make them in bulk yourself, you can save a lot of money there. So I gave an example earlier for myself, and again, this might not be right for you, but a chicken Caesar salad. So I can go to a restaurant, order a chicken Caesar salad, and it's $15. I can go buy a pre-made chicken Caesar salad for like, $6, $7, $8 in the grocery store and eat it for lunch. But I can also buy the romaine, have the dressing, a little bit of Parmesan cheese, and then the chicken, I could buy a rotisserie chicken, shred that, and that one chicken has enough for at least 4 or 5 meals for me. And that is way more cost effective. So I would encourage you to think about, number one is the bulk type of purchasing. And then secondly, the types of things you eat. How much of the prep are you leaving to the manufacturer? Because they package it for you for convenience and then charge you for that convenience. So if you're willing to take on the little bit of inconvenience of making yourself, you can save a lot of money.
Yeah, I think that's awesome advice and so pertinent for right now. We have another attendee who would like to know if you have a good protein drink or food for someone who has diabetes.
Oh, it's a great question. This audience is in tune. I love it. So there are several out there. What I would encourage you to do without promoting one specific brand is I would look for those that have the minimal amount of sugar and carbohydrate in them, because that's what's going to cause the blood glucose fluctuations, is the sugar that's in the beverages. Now there are the shakes. Making them on your own is sometimes a great way to go. Again, please work with your dietitian and provider, because people have different mineral needs and different protein requirements. But I would probably recommend purchasing your own protein powder. Again, if that is right for you, please talk to your doctor, because that's very important in kidney disease, is the right amount of protein. Okay. But buying your own protein powder and then mixing that with, and like I said, I have 2 boys who are hockey players, weightlifters, so that we do this in our household, and then mix it with frozen or fresh mixed berries, is a way to keep the carbohydrates down a little bit, but still have some flavor in there. So I would say making them yourself. And then if you can't make them yourself, I would look for the brands that have the lowest amounts of sugar and total carbohydrates.
Excellent. Thank you. We had some questions from registration when people were registering. So I'll go to those. One of them was, is there a good renal diet cookbook? And I'll just start with, I'm going to drop a link in the chat that you guys can use too, but it's called Kidney Kitchen from the Kidney Fund. And that has a nice resource for renal diet. You can use the drop down menu and go straight to things like low phosphorus or low potassium or low protein. It's all based on, again, we've said this, what your provider wants you to have, but at least it's categorized for you. And that might be a good tool. Rich, do you know any other renal diet cookbook or renal resources that I'm missing?
Yeah, I think that's really a great go-to. I would start there. And then there are other, with the Kidney Foundation, et cetera, there are other resources available, just, that I would take a look at as well.
Yeah, and that's a good place to start on the internet because it's free, so you don't have to go buy a physical cookbook or anything like that. You can always go into that later on if you don't meet your needs with those resources. Our other one was what to eat or not eat with polycystic kidney disease. I think, again, talking to your provider, unfortunately, with polycystic kidney disease, you can have different needs. There's not one diet for that disease. It's going to be based on what your potassium's been running, or, where exactly you are in your kidney disease, where that GFR is, that filtration rate that we talked about at the beginning. So getting a base point from your provider is a good starting place with what not to eat.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have another one about these obstacles. So what if my only option is fast food because I have a super busy schedule?
That's great. So let's see. What I would do is, if the fast food restaurant, I would do a little research ahead of time, because generally they will post a lot of nutrition information, and that's sort of an advantage over maybe a mom and pop. I'm trying to be optimistic here. There is usually some available nutrition information, and there's usually a lot of consistency in the preparation of the food. So I would look at the menu and then come up with a go-to meal. So now you've talked to your provider, your registered dietitian, the pattern that's right for you, and you match up some of the things that are at the restaurant. So if you're somebody who's watching carbohydrates and you're going to for example, someplace like a Burger King or a McDonald's, they do serve salads there. So you could get and prepare to get a salad. And I've even known somebody who carried their own salad dressing, who preferred to stay away from certain types of oils, and was able to find a fast food salad with their own vegetable, with their own salad dressing, and be successful there. So it's about looking at what they have. And then the second is one is looking at the menu. Two is, I would say, don't be afraid to be creative. Okay. So you're thinking, well, what do you mean by creative? You can ask for modifications to things. Okay. So for example, for me, who I eat a certain type of pattern that I know works for me, I might have one of their burgers with no bun on it. And that's a weird thing to think about. Who would ever eat something like that? Especially if you get a salad to put it on. That's something for me that works. It may not work for you, but that's worked for me. So I can ask for these weird things, or even just take what they give me and modify it myself. So I would say, look at what they have and then make your own modifications if you need to.
Perfect. Yes, definitely. We have another attendee who's in a sticky situation. She says her father is very stubborn from the South and refuses to listen to his nephrologist. How can I encourage him to stay on his renal diet, especially when I don't live with him?
Yeah, thank you so much for putting that question out there. And I'm going to guess that number one, you're definitely not alone. A lot of folks taking care of somebody who they care about, who have any health condition that has special nutrition needs, can be really, really difficult. And one of the things that resonates sometimes with folks is what I would call their why. Okay, your why. So the why is, to you, deep at your core, like, what matters to you? And how does your health condition relate to what matters to you? So sometimes tying that connection right there is the way to do it. Because let's face it, with a nutrition food exposure, there's not always this immediate cause and effect. And so there's not always this immediate feedback that you need to get that result and that behavior change you're looking for. So connecting it to that why can be really important. So I would ask this person about the things that matter and how their health impacts that. And let me give a couple examples. Again, I don't know the situation, but I'm going to make some things up just for the sake of argument, but you can fill in the blank with what's really going on. Some people are really excited to see their favorite football team, and it is football season, but getting to a stadium is not easy for a lot of people. And so if there is a goal to say, I really want to get to a playoff game in December, in January, my mobility is not great. That's kind of a connection to say, how can I be eating the way now to maybe help myself be feeling a little bit better where I can actually get out. I can catch a quarter of the high school football game that I really want to see. So I would think about the whys and how to connect the ways that you eat to that. That would be one. And then secondly, think about when things go well, how did the person feel when it went well? And reminding them of, hey, there's some sacrifice that goes on, but remember the last time we did this, you felt great. You typically are really tired at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That day that you chose the salad instead of the fried chicken for lunch, you had energy. You were excited when we talked on the phone. Let's try that again. Let's try that one more time. Instead of this daunting task of, hey, dad, you can't ever eat cookies anymore.
Yeah, I think that is such a situation that comes up over and over again. And being a caregiver is so full of love and so difficult. So I know there's lots of people out there, and those are great pieces of advice for them. We have another attendee who's asking about that they've been hearing they need to lay off red meat. And it's really hard because they enjoy a good steak. So can you help us debunk this, or will my wife really have to limit my steak intake?
Thank you so much for this question. This is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of the webinar. And I love that somebody asked about it, because you are seeing the same thing I'm seeing: confusion in nutrition. So one day you hear red meat is absolutely awful for you, and another day you hear it's fine, you can eat as much red meat as you want, and which one's right? And that's where it gets really difficult. So for me to sit here and say to you conclusively, you can eat all the red meat you want, it doesn't matter, is not possible based on any scientific data. I would also say that red meat is, if you were to try to make the case that red meat is absolutely horrible for everyone's health and shouldn't exist, I don't think anybody can make that case with convincing data. So I'm not here to start up a lot of controversy, but what I would say is to work with your provider, understand what their philosophy is, and don't be afraid to ask questions. So if your provider says you should never ever eat red meat again, I would be curious what the data are to show that you should not do that. And are the data that you have based that recommendation on coming from people like me? So I would ask those types of questions to really kind of understand where you fit there. So we could do an entire seminar series on this topic, by the way. So thank you for asking. I wish I could get into more detail, but we would need weeks to break it down and cover it.
Thank you. Yeah, I know there are so many instances where people have written off entire, one food. So that's really good advice. And talking with the provider is always the answer. So what are some benefits to meal prepping for patients with chronic kidney disease?
So meal prepping takes a lot of time, and that's kind of one of the cons that some people would say. But there are a lot of pros. So one of the pros is what's going into the food. Okay, so if I am making something from scratch, I know exactly what's going in there. And if you have very, very specific mineral or protein requirements, that's important that you know what's going in to your food. And I think probably a lot of our viewers now probably do have some pretty specific mineral, so you call micronutrients, your minerals, your vitamins, very specific micronutrient requirements. So it's important that you know what's going into your food. When you're prepping the food, you have a lot more control of what goes into it. So that would be number one. Number two comes back to one of our earlier questions about cost. Usually when you're preparing food, you can keep the cost down, and because you're not paying for that convenience factor. So I would say those are like the two biggest reasons that you would want to go through the inconvenience of preparing your own food, is controlling what's in it. Again, very, very important for some folks. And then secondly, keeping the costs under control.
Perfect. Yes. We have Steve who's interacting with us. He doesn't necessarily have a question, but it says, the holidays are coming, so I'm just asking for some prayers for the turkey meatloaf I'm bringing.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. I wish you all the best with that.
Yes, you're in our thoughts. And let's see. I'm not sure what my specific requirements for nutrition are, but how can I find out?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. And we've been saying throughout, talk to your provider, talk to your provider. So, but we really didn't get into detail. So here's what I would recommend. If you have an appointment coming up with your provider, make some notes. And it's a good idea to, before any doctor's appointment, okay, have your pad and paper. And when you go in there, say, hey, I've been really trying to focus on my nutrition, but I'm confused. What are my nutrient requirements? What should I be following? So asking your doctor, asking your PA, whoever it is that you're seeing. So that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, when you're there, I would say, do I have access to a renal dietitian? So that's a registered dietitian who has an expertise in helping people with kidney disease. So I would say, do you have access to that? And you might even want to call your health plan to understand what type of health plan benefits you have with a dietitian. So I would ask those two individuals. Now, I gave the example of, if you've got an appointment coming up, well, maybe you're sitting there going, I want to do this now. I don't have an appointment until February. It's okay to call. I would call, and there are a lot of portals out there, depending on the EMR that they use, where sometimes you can actually send an email to your provider. But I can't emphasize enough for you to self-advocate. And this is another one we could talk about for a long time. Don't be afraid to reach out to your provider, to ask questions, to ask for a referral to a registered dietitian if you can. That's one of the best ways you can get the detailed information you need.
Absolutely. Yes. When I was working as a CKD case manager, I talked with lots of patients, and you mentioned writing things down before your appointment. And I would say that that is one of my favorite pieces of advice, because I talked to so many people before and after their appointment, and all the things that we talked about, they forgot to ask because it's a stressful situation. You panicked, you're hearing things, all this information is coming at you, and they only have 15 minutes to talk. So I just want to emphasize the write it down, take it with you, so that you're not kicking yourself when you're leaving.
Great.
Okay. And then in your opinion, is there any specific type of cuisine that should be avoided to stay healthy with CKD?
Okay. Great question again. So I am not generally a believer in the never for a group recommendation. If you've noticed, I'm very much about personalized nutrition. And so for the most part, a lot of foods would fall into a gray area. Okay. So some of the things that, and I would look at foods, boy, Caroline, we could maybe do another one someday on my take on the term healthy foods. That's a whole hour. So I can't go into it right now, but I don't look at the world like that at all. It's really about a spectrum. And imagine this little spectrum. And when I was teaching, I was a college professor for 10 years. Maybe you guessed that because I talk so much already. But I had this spectrum I would put up on the board, and there was like this red side, and it faded, okay, and it faded over into like very green. And foods fall somewhere on there. And the idea is that you want your pattern to be on the green end of the spectrum. And then the foods that you're eating, depending on your needs at this time, fall somewhere on the spectrum as well. So now you compile those last 10 food exposures, and you can put a mark somewhere on that line of where you are. So it's really hard to say you should never eat blank cuisine,
Mhm.
because that's not really a personalized approach to it. So that being said, I will give some examples of the types of things that would be on the red end that you would, I mean, should have very minimal, if any, ever at all. Things like soft drinks, especially regular sodas, and I'm from the Northeast, so we say soda, or pop. Okay. Especially because of the mineral requirements for people with kidney disease, the amount of sugar, there's zero potential value. So that would be something that would be on the red end, should probably completely avoid, especially full calorie soft drinks, but probably all of them in general. Other things like very heavily processed dessert type of foods. So that would be something like, I shouldn't call out any specific brands, but pre-packaged cupcakes. You're getting like Zippo out of that, and it's really not a great fit for most people. So I would say that type of stuff is where I would start, and then you're moving further down the spectrum from there.
Perfect. Well, we will take one more question, and it's, how can I incorporate a healthy lifestyle when the other, people around me aren't following that same healthy habit?
One of my favorite things to talk about on that topic is that, especially, and I see this a lot in people who really care about others, actually. This is not a common complaint for people who are really, really self-centered. So this is really something I hear from people who care so much about everyone around them, that they are sucked out of where they need to be by the people around them. You can't take care of others until you take care of yourself. And I would just advocate for yourself, whatever that may mean. And when the folks around you are not being supportive of that, you can remind yourself, well, it's too bad they're being that way, but if I don't do what I need, I can't take care of these individuals. So I have to go out and do this. So again, if you're one of those people who cares about taking care of others, that would generally resonate. Just take care of yourself so you can take care of others.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic place to end it on. Well, thank you so much, Rich, for being here today. I took away so much from this. I know everybody else did too. So we really appreciate you being here.
It was a real blast. Thank you so much. Know yourself, think in patterns, and be prepared for nutrition. I wish everybody all the best.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for being here. If you have any additional questions for Rich or myself, feel free to send us an email. That should pop up here. And then all of this will be on our platform in the coming days. Please take a look out for our future webinars, and you can also watch our past ones. And please take a moment to fill out our survey. We would love to hear from you and what topics you might like us to focus on in our future webinars. Have a great day, guys.